There is this conventional wisdom out there that the Chinese government is acquiring large amounts of land in Africa, and they're doing it for the purpose of growing food to send back to feed the Chinese people. And also they're sending Chinese farmers to do it. So there are really four areas in this set of beliefs about what the Chinese are doing in rural Africa. Why would the Chinese want to acquire land in Africa? Why would they be concerned about food? Well, it's obvious why they would be concerned about food. They have about 9% of the world's arable land and 22% of the world's people. And it's a very densely populated area. It's a big country, but densely populated. And food security is a concern for them. And so it seems to be a good match. Chinese capital, Chinese workers. Africa is an underpopulated region, a lot of land, and not used very intensively. So a lot of people, I think, looked at it and they thought, well, China must be interested in growing its food in Africa. The pattern of Chinese investment is one, I think, that really reflects trends of globalization. The Chinese companies that go to Africa are looking for business opportunities. And what's interesting is that they've been going to Africa since 1990, and they've been investing in farming activities since then. Some of the early farming activities actually turn out to be old aid projects that ended up being privatized by African governments, big state farms that the Chinese helped build back when big state farms were popular. And then they were privatized, and some of the Chinese companies that had built those farms ended up coming back to run them. So some of the Chinese investments that you look at in Africa have that kind of history. But others turn out to be ones that companies looked at Africa as a place where they might be able to make a profit. There has been a lot of hype about Africa rising. And so companies have been coming from all over the world to look at Africa as a place to invest for mining, oil, and also for agriculture. So Chinese companies have been like that too. So the companies that bought existing farms and are now running them with Chinese management, those are doing a lot better. The ones where they tried to do something that we call a greenfield investment, which would be totally new in an area where there hadn't been a plantation or a big farm, very few, if any of those, have actually worked. Let's talk a little bit about some of the existing investments. You've got the early investments in places like Zambia. These are growing crops for local markets. And so you see wheat, maize, chickens, eggs, these kinds of things are very popular, even beef cattle. So these are for local markets in places like Lusaka or other places in southern Africa. And I did visit many of these farms in Africa, and I talked to one in Zambia, just outside of Lusaka. And he was growing wheat and maize and soybeans, and he was selling them all locally. But I had to ask him, are you planning to export to China? And he looked at me and he said, Zambia is a landlocked country. If we were going to export to China, we would lose money. And I think a lot of, he's very pragmatic. So that's his goal, is to make money and be profitable, and the Zambian market provides an opportunity. Let's put this into context. The African continent, by and large, is a food deficit region. So they are importing, for example, 10 million tons of rice every year. So it wouldn't really make sense for Chinese companies to go to Africa and produce rice when Africa's importing rice already from Asia. I first started looking into Chinese activities in rural Africa in 1983. And I've been looking at it ever since. So I have a deep background in this area. And because I've written now 3 books on what the Chinese are doing in Africa and many articles, I've done a lot of research on this over the course of 25 years. I can look at a headline and I can be skeptical as to whether that headline actually represents reality. For this book, with a team of students and research assistants, we collected 60 cases that we found in researchers' reports, in the media headlines, in think tank reports that were supposed to represent Chinese investment in Africa. And these were anything over 500 hectares. So these were supposed to be of a sort of a big size. And we examined every one of those reports. We either did it on the internet using something that I call forensic internet sleuthing, which is a way to just dig into a particular story and try to figure out what happened. Some of these are actually pretty easy to find out that nothing happened. A lot of people look at what the Chinese are doing in Africa. They see a headline which might be about an intention. An investor comes, they talk about something very enthusiastically because they want to get the support of the host government. They say, we're going to do something really big. Help us, and help us line up the land, help us get the business permits, everything, maybe a loan, all these kinds of areas of support. And so local people get excited, local governments get excited, and then it peters out because it doesn't actually look like it's going to be feasible or profitable. But those reports may have gotten into a headline, and then they might have, these days, they circulate around the internet and around the globe, and people don't know that actually nothing happened. They just see China is going to invest 3 million hectares in the DRC, and then that goes into The Economist and The Guardian and the New York Times. The Chinese are interested in investment in the agricultural sector, but they're looking at it strategically in terms of what are the areas where they can actually make money. And the area that they're most interested in right now is contract farming. So this is something that's much lower risk. You don't actually have to acquire any land. African farmers do the production. The Chinese companies provide them with better seeds, training in order to increase their product and their yield, and then they buy the product. So we see this happening now in the tobacco sector, very successful in Zimbabwe, other parts of southern Africa. Cotton is very big, and there are probably 6, 7, 8 countries where the Chinese have this cotton subcontracting arrangements. They're doing it with sesame seeds. So there are a number of different crops that African farmers are already doing a good job, and they can do an even better job. And Chinese companies want to buy those and bring them back to China. So that kind of arrangement, I think, is certainly the majority of new projects are taking a subcontracting farming arrangement.